Ladies and gents, welcome back to another video. Today we've got a 2010 MacBook Pro 15-inch. This is a spec'd out model. We're going to go over a lot of the details of this computer, talk about the specs, run through some benchmarks, play a little Minecraft, and see if this computer is worth it in 2024. So here are the specs. Go ahead and zoom in a little bit for you guys. We've got a 2.66 gigahertz dual core i7, 8 gigabytes of DDR3 memory. We've got dual graphics with Intel HD graphics, and we've got ourselves NVIDIA GeForce GT 330M. Heading over to the display tab, you can see we have a high resolution 1680 by 1050. This was an added option back in 2010. This is obviously high resolution, but it's also the matte finish, as I'm sure you saw there in my intro. It is not the glossy display. I think these look so much better than their glossy counterparts. Heading over to the storage tab, we've got ourselves 250 gigabytes of solid state storage. So that's an upgrade I did myself, as is the memory. I went from 4 to 8 gigabytes here on our 2010 MacBook. Heading back to the overview tab, we'll go ahead and click on System Report to reveal a few more details here. And let's head into the power tab. You can see our battery is at normal condition with a pretty low 313 cycles. So that's actually very good considering the age of this computer. It is 14 years old, and the battery's only been used almost once a day for 1 year, not 14 years. So that is pretty impressive. So that is the detail on our specs. Now let's talk about the specs of this MacBook back in 2010. What options could you get for the 15-inch in 2010? And here we go. This is actually a little bit jumbled. I don't know why it looks like this, but I'll zoom in just a little bit here. So for graphics, you could get the 330M on both configurations, but the VRAM amount is what's different. You could get this with 256 megabytes of VRAM, or you could get an upgraded 512 megabytes, which is what our computer here has. Both models shared the Intel HD graphics. And this is actually the first MacBook that has automatic switching. So in prior versions with dual graphics, you actually had to log out before the graphics would switch. Now it just switches with the snap of a finger, essentially. And let's see, we should have some CPU options. Yeah, so you could get a 2.4 or a 2.53 gigahertz i5. That's a dual core processor. Or you could get a 2.6 gigahertz dual core i7 processor. Now, these are i5 and i7s. These are first gen Intel CPUs. So this is only a dual core chip, even though you're probably familiar with the 15-inch MacBook Pro having at least a quad core CPU. This one does not. These are 2-core 4-thread processors, both the i5 and the i7. The RAM was 4 gigabytes standard, although you could upgrade to 8. And I don't think you can get 16 with this MacBook. I think 8 is the max. Here are the options for storage. And most people picked the standard serial ATA hard drive because that was plenty fast for the time. But here in 2024, you got to have an SSD. Luckily for us, they are really cheap and you can pick up a 256 for like 20 bucks. So that is a great deal. So that's enough of the specs. Now let's talk benchmarks. I went ahead and ran Geekbench 4 because I want to compare some older MacBooks, and that's just the best version. Here are the results. So 2505 for single core, 4904 for multi-core. So this MacBook was a big improvement on the Core 2 Duo models that it replaced, with the benchmarks significantly going up in their numbers. Down here you can see this is our Intel Core i7. It's a 620M. Again, it's a first gen i7, 2 cores, 4 threads, clocked at 2.66 gigahertz. Now I'll go ahead and pause this video and I'll throw up a graph to show you guys some comparative numbers for our MacBook. So this one was quite a bit faster than the Core 2 Duo that I replaced, but it was actually quickly overshadowed by the 2011 and especially the 2012 MacBooks that came shortly after with their quad-core CPUs. So it was definitely a good step in the right direction, but this computer was pretty slow compared to the ones that replaced it. Now, let's go ahead and get ourselves fired up here because we've got some Minecraft. So let me go ahead and launch that. This should be the latest version of Minecraft. We're going to see how well it performs with our first gen i7 paired with that NVIDIA GT330M. Of course, we've got 8 gigs of RAM and our beautiful 15.4-inch anti-glare matte display. But we got to have ourselves some realistic expectations here. This is not a gaming PC. This is a Mac from 14 years ago. So we're going to see just how well Minecraft plays. Keep in mind, Minecraft is a very CPU intensive game. So I think our frames are going to be pretty good, at least if the resolution's low, because our graphics card should be able to handle it just fine. But I think we might run into some problems with our CPU not being able to load the game fast enough. We're going to find out here in just a minute once the application finally decides to load. All right, here we go. First things first, we're going to make this full screen. We're going to head into options and make sure our video settings are correct. We'll go ahead, we'll see if fancy graphics are going to work. We'll do a render distance of 12 chunks, turn the simulation all the way down. We'll max the frame rate at 60 because that's all this display is capable of doing. Everything else should be the same, and we'll go ahead and create a creative world because I think that's going to allow us to showcase this computer's performance, whether that's good or bad. So we'll go ahead and create a new world here, and this is probably going to take a while, so I'm going to go ahead and speed up the creation world process. And here we go, our game should be loading. Now, something I want to point out before we begin is the noise and the heat from our CPU-GPU combo. They are freshly repasted, so I opened this thing up, took it apart, and put fresh thermal paste on both the CPU and the GPU. So if you hear the fan noise, it's because the CPU is actually hot. It is not because this thing is just old. So here we go, we are in our world. Let's go ahead and fly up there. This is actually a little bit stuttery. I am recording in 60 FPS, so you guys are seeing the game exactly as it's being played. Let me try to make that as full screen as possible. And so our world is beginning to load in here. As we take a look around, it's actually a little bit stuttery. If you watched my 2009 17-inch review, you'll probably notice that this feels pretty similar in terms of the frames per second. But the world is actually loading a little bit quicker here because this i7 is quite a bit faster than the Core 2 Duo from 2009. So this is performing quite a bit better. And I do have fancy graphics on, so that's going to make a difference as well. I bet if I turn that off, we'd be getting 60 frames per second. So let's see if I can catch the edge of the map. Obviously, I can here when we're flying. But if we drop down to the ground and start sprinting, can we go faster than the game is able to load? And it looks like we are not going to quite be able to catch the edge there. We get close and then the CPU pulls through and is able to render that next portion of the map. So I would say this is definitely playable here in 2024. It's loading quite a bit faster here when there are no trees or something to load, but this is definitely playable. You could fire up Minecraft and turn the settings down a little bit, and you could have yourself a pretty good experience. Let's see if I can make a few adjustments and reach 60 frames per second. So we're going to go ahead and turn the graphics down to fast, and I think we will turn the resolution down a little bit. We'll keep the render distance the same, and we'll see how this looks. So resolution is good. The game's actually loading quite a bit faster, and it feels a little bit smoother as well. Really don't notice it looking much worse other than the trees don't have quite as much detail. And I think this is getting a little bit better FPS, but yeah, definitely still playable. I think it was playable before. So if you want to fire up Minecraft on a 2010 MacBook, you can definitely do so. Keep in mind, we've got 8 gigs of RAM here. I really think that's going to be the minimum. You might be able to get away with 6, but anything less than that, you're going to run into some serious problems. And yeah, so there you have it. That's been a quick look here at gaming on the 2010 MacBook Pro. pretty impressive given its age with its first generation Core i7. I don't know if you guys can hear the fan noise. I'll put the microphone down next to the keyboard. But it's actually not too loud. I don't even know if the microphone was able to pick that up. But this is a pretty quiet fan noise here, considering that this computer is being pushed to its absolute max. Let's test out the speakers, so I'll go ahead and turn up the volume. All right, so the speakers are pretty decent for this computer's age. Certainly not as good as any of the new MacBook Pro or even the MacBook Air models. But overall, I think that was a really good experience, and I would certainly call that playable on our 2010 MacBook Pro. Now we'll go ahead and exit back out to the desktop, and now we're going to talk about the ports of our MacBook Pro, because this is pretty interesting in terms of what you get and what you don't get. So we'll go ahead and close the lid. We'll head over here to the left side and take a look at our port selection. We've got MagSafe, Ethernet, FireWire, mini DisplayPort, which I believe can do 1440p at 60 frames per second. We've got two USB ports. Unfortunately, these are only USB 2.0. We do have an SD card reader as well as headphone and audio ports there. And last but not least, we've got ourselves a LED light indicator there that's going to show us the battery status, whether it's charging and how much charge is remaining. Super nice feature on the older unibody MacBooks. The rest of our device is very similar. If you've seen one unibody MacBook, you've basically seen them all. Pretty clean device overall, but there are a few scratches. So should you buy one of these in 2024? I think the answer is probably not, unless you're just kind of going for the vintage Apple look here. The 2010s actually have a pretty critical graphics card failure, or at least that's how it displays. It actually turns out that it's a capacitor on the device that goes bad and prevents the graphics from switching, but the symptoms are that of a graphical card failure. That's what this computer had, and it was not working, so I went ahead and replaced the capacitor on it, which was actually fairly easy. If you've got a micro soldering station, it's actually a very simple process of replacing that capacitor. And that means that this computer is now fully functional here in 2024, and I got macOS Big Sur installed. This computer runs macOS High Sierra natively, but High Sierra is really hard to use, especially using anything like Safari or email. It's just pretty out of date. And I went ahead and I used OpenCore Patcher to install macOS Big Sur, which is running really smoothly. You could go all the way up to macOS Sonoma, but I think our first gen Intel CPUs are really going to struggle with that. So I picked something a little lighter like Big Sur. Lots of modern features, looks very nice, especially with our anti-glare display. And performance is pretty good as well. We'll go ahead and head into settings there, and I can show you we're going to turn off the dedicated graphics card here. So we'll go to the battery tab and we'll click on automatic graphics switching. Now we should be running on the Intel HD graphics instead of the NVIDIA. Just like that, we'll save a little battery and our computer will run a little bit cooler. So there you have it. I think this MacBook is definitely good for Safari, doing emails, typing documents, doing PowerPoints, keynotes. Photos is going to run really well on here, and you can even do a little bit of light gaming or even some modern gaming such as Minecraft. So very capable device, and it's actually really upgradable and replaceable. The unibody MacBooks have really stood the test of time. They are great computers, and this one is certainly one of my favorites, especially with that gorgeous display. So in terms of price for these, I paid around $70 and then threw in an SSD that cost me like $20. So we're looking at close to $90 there for this specific MacBook. Oh, and about like $2 or $3 for that extra capacitor that I soldered on. So under $100 for a computer that looks this good and still feels pretty modern, I think that's a really good deal. So there you have it. That's been a decently comprehensive review there of our 2010 MacBook Pro 17-inch here in 2024. Leave me some comments down below. Is anybody still rocking one of these as their main device, or do you just have one laying around? You got to fix it up. Either way, excited to hear what you guys have to say about this. So thank you so much for watching. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in another one of my videos.